am live. I am reading on, and I am reading now chapter 9 of Return to Elysium. It is a Joan Grant far memory book. It's her own incarnation, and it plays in Greece, 2nd century BC. And she's had a conversation with all of them. They've had the threat of a plague which has passed. It was the morning of the 7th day. Tomorrow we could go back to Asclepius. Tell him that our courage was stronger than Tyrian purple, that affection was more powerful than philosophy. I had intended to collect mushrooms with Agamemnon, but instead we idled in the sound of the waterfall and basked in the autumn heat. It is wonderful to lie here, he said, doing nothing, thinking nothing except the kind, trivial thoughts which come from watching water slide gently over rocks. I've never had time to notice the shape of small, unimportant flowers, or to listen to the murmur of bees. I was blind except to the harsh challenge of banners, deafened by battles which were never joined. It is terrible, Lucina, to have been a coward so long. You were never a coward. It was only that the man in the past had an ordeal too hard for him. You took his guilt on your shoulders and looked forwards instead of backwards in search of a shield against this sword. You found a sword. You had the courage to take it by the hilt and draw it out of my heart. Because I loved you, because you gave me the strength to forget my own fear. I told you about the linnet. She must have loved the hawk for making her brave, even though she thought it was only her nestlings that she loved. Love is the only thing which is stronger than fear. Love can make all women strong in defense of their young, all men brave in protection of women, all soldiers heroes in defense of their country, if only they love enough. Why didn't Asclepius tell me that? Because he will not accept it. He never told any of us that we have to love ourselves before we can love anyone else. He let you go on hating yourself. He tried to give you courage by reminding you of weakness. It's not very clever of Asclepius. You are sure it was a real sword, a real man in that banqueting hall? Yes, I'm sure that the past is as real as the future. It is nonsense to say that both are only a reflection of the present. I didn't imagine I used to be an athlete. He was a part of the whole, of whom Lucina is another part. I am Lucina and the athlete and a woman who challenged the goat man, and probably lots of other people. I cannot remember. They were real, and Lucina is real. When Lucina dies, I shall still be real, not only a memory, or an idea, or a shade in Hades, or an immortal on Olympus. I shall still be a person quite solid and ordinary, as you and I are ordinary here and now. Perhaps the past and the future are always here and now. Nothing to fear, nothing which needs elaborate words to describe. We must both cling to that truth, Agamemnon. We have proved it for ourselves. No one can take it away from us. We had a disease, which Asclepius admitted was incurable. You were dying, and then you accepted the past, and were no longer prisoned in it. And so you got well. Only 6 days ago you were too weak to hold a cup, and now you can carry 2 water jars, 2 full water jars. You gave me that truth, he said, and kissed me on the shoulder. I suppose Asclepius would say, you freed me from guilt. And you freed me when I told you about the spiders and you didn't hate me. He smiled. That wasn't difficult. I always knew you produced spiders to frighten me, but I never had the courage to tell you, or to laugh, or even to hate you. You know very little history, because I never forced you to learn in case you brought more spiders. Will you forgive me for your lack of education? I leaned on my elbow so that I could see him better. I'm not interested in knowledge, I said contentedly. I never seem to give you the important thing. It never seems to give you the important things, and it is such a trouble to acquire. I heard Cleon whistle, the tune he used when he wanted me to answer. We are by the waterfall, I shouted. Come back, we want you. His voice, muffled by the trees, sounded excited. Asclepius was with the others outside the house. I had expected him to be glad to see us healthy, to praise us for having withstood the plague, but he looked just as he always did when embarking on a sea of words, and the others seemed curiously subdued. So I hear that my little experiment was not without incident, he said, his eyebrows raised to show he was amused. Lucina, my dear, I must congratulate you on showing remarkable courage and initiative. I'm glad you find it interesting that none of us died. Or has that spoiled the full value of your discovery? Would it have been more satisfactory if one had died and the others lived? Or you will never be quite sure what the cloaks held death. That the cloaks held death. But I am, Lucina. I knew that the cloaks could produce no more than a harmless rush, due to some quality of the dye. Annoying, but I assure you, not in the least inimical to death, to health. Then why did you lie to us? Or have lies become the coinage of philosophy? I knew I was being rude, but was far too angry to care. Have I not impressed on you that it is necessary to fight an enemy in his own terms? To teach you to conquer a real fear, I thought is advisable, to provide an imaginary one. Agamemnon was dying, said Cleon hotly. You weren't here, so you can't judge. None of us are fools, so you can't make us believe he wasn't very dangerously ill. You misjudge me, Cleon. I'm fully aware that I exposed you all to danger, great danger, which might have been fatal. However, I consider it my duty to train you to take your place in the world. And the world is not the nursery. You are not children who can still demand entire security. I was cold with anger. You treat us as children so that you can play the role of the wise father. Do you enjoy it? Are you sure you enjoy telling lies to make your deluded children shiver in the dark? It seems, Lucina, that you have not outgrown the phrase of childish temper. He was not even angry, he was only tolerant and amused. At least I'm not buried in the pomposity of age, which has made you forget what it feels like to be human. Even this did not ruffle him, though Cleon whispered, Don't say too much, Lucina. You are all displaying a natural emotion due to the belated recognition that you have suffered an unpleasant experience created by your personal fears. If I had not a deep and lasting affection for you all, I should not have undertaken an experiment which, though beneficial to yourselves, may possibly undermine your faith in me. I wanted to give you confidence, the real confidence which comes only through experience. I admit I was conceited enough to feel sure that my faith in the reality of my philosophy was built on solid rock. And if we had died to prove your philosophy, that would have been our own fault. Epicurus spoke quietly, but I knew he was nearly as angry as I. Precisely, but I should have left Elysium to return to the practice of the ordinary physician. Or I might have decided that I was better employed in some way which is not directly concerned with the lives and happiness of my fellows. Before we enter into a dispute about what might have occurred, let us calmly consider what has in fact taken place. We will start with Lucina, who seems to feel more violently than the rest of you, and who therefore is in more urgent need of a balanced view of the situation. However, as we are likely to take some time, I think it would be better if we were to assume postures congenial to conversation. He took his place on the bench by the door, and the others sat on the ground. I made them wait while I fetched a cushion. The tiles were hard, and I wanted to show I was not impatient to hear what he had to say. Now that Lucina is comfortable, she will, no doubt, be willing to listen to pompous age. I smiled politely, delighted that at least one thrust had found a chink in the sculptured folds of his robe. Though Lucina on many occasions has displayed a remarkable degree of intelligence, I have frequently been disturbed by her tendency to ascribe to natural phenomena some supernatural source. Instead of accepting that her unusual perception allows her a degree of awareness into the thought projections of people closely connected with her, she prefers to believe that these subjective mirages have an objective reality. I have explained to her that the mind has depth of which only the surface is visible to the casual beholder. I used the analogy of a turbid fluid in a jar. The fluid is deliberately stirred or the jar shaken with some outside disturbance, and the surface pattern is immediately altered. In our mind, as in all our minds, there are thousands of constituents which, though out of focus, are constantly present. For instance, Lucina, as a child, was deliberately given an extremely restricted environment. The two people in whose care I placed her had an almost bovine intelligence. Yet Lucina must have heard them describe the training of a runner. She may have overheard them talking in the next room when she was half asleep, and therefore retained no conscious memory of their conversation. It was from this drop added to her jar that the dreams of herself as an athlete were projected. She accepted my explanation until, under the stress of violent emotion, to children and all primitives, thunder and other manifestations of natural laws are an active stimulus to her hereditary fears. She imagined she could not only see her mother and herself as a child of 2 or 3 years old, but that she had some power by which the child was able to appeal to the mother for help. She extended this fantasy until she saw the mother walk across the room, and in so doing become free to go to some unspecified realm where she would enjoy the companionship of the man from whom circumstances had irrevocably separated her. I consider this factor in Lucina's character to be a dangerous weakness, indicating, as it does, that she finds life too difficult and longs to escape into some nebulous afterworld. As she has a highly developed faculty for creating mental images, I think it probable that this afterworld has all the advantages of the normal environment. On her Olympus, the ambrosia resembles raspberries and cream, or even prawns, both retaining, you will notice, the rosy hue of mountain clouds at dawn. Her nectar may still be closer to fruit juice and honey than to the great vintages, but no doubt she will in due course make such minor adjustments on the maturity of her palate demands. I hope no one realized how close this came to the meals I had planned for my parents in Olympus. Why should they not eat prawns if they liked them? Could not immortals enjoy the pomegranates they had invented for the pleasure of other people? As Lucina does not feel inclined to make any comment, I will presume that I am not entirely irrelevant in my remarks. He was warming to his theme. Nothing would stop him now, and we were expected to listen in attentive silence. However, when Lucina found herself in a situation which demanded immediate practical action, she discarded the fantasy for the reality. She remembered that fever responds to sponging with wine, that the sick need nourishments in small but frequent quantities, and, by far the most important, she knows that the cause of the disease, as of all diseases of mind or body, was fear. Agamemnon imagined he saw a sword suspended over his head, but instead of trying to argue with him, she let him believe the sword was real and therefore that she could remove it. A most excellent demonstration of the power of the stronger mind to heal the weaker. He smiled benignly at me. I hope you will all pay due attention when I say that I am delighted with Lucina. In her you see what I sincerely believe will be the first female philosopher, the first female realist which our civilization has produced. A few days ago I should have been flattered. Now I only felt insulted because he had not the wit to recognize that he could no longer coax me into accepting his ideas. As you are so wise, why didn't you see the sword yourself? Why didn't you take it away from him? Because the sword appeared only under the stimulus of the fool's illness. If it had been relevant before, he would have told me about it during the course of our many conversations. It was a real sword. Then no doubt you will bring it here to show me. If you can produce a sword such as Cleon said you described, I will admit myself justly rebuked. You know it wasn't an ordinary sword, not the kind you can feel. So your claim that the hilt was cold against your skin was a pardonable exaggeration? I did feel it, but you said it could not be felt. You are only trying to confuse me with words. I hate words. They never describe what I mean. They are nets to catch birds, which until they were trapped could see further than blind, stupid ants of humans. Birds, ants, pats, nets, and a moment ago it was a sword. Surely there is confusion in your mind, which must be resolved before we continue the pursuit of truth. Cleon tried to rescue me from the morass into which I was being lured. I believe in the sword, so does Agamemnon. Ask him. How comfortable for Agamemnon, no doubt a much more desirable state than the imaginary fever which preceded this new belief. A red flood of embarrassment spread upwards from Agamemnon's neck to his forehead. I thought he was going to cry. Perhaps Asclepius regretted the cruelty of his last remark, for he gave him no opportunity to speak. The sword has always, or at least during several millennia, been the symbol of conflict. Agamemnon has an adequate share of courage for any normal situation he is likely to meet. That he has always tried to drive himself beyond these limitations is, as you know, the product of an unfortunate background and the absorption during the formative childhood period of a false standard of behavior. Agamemnon is a historian. It is therefore certain that he has learned many fragments of the past which he does not clearly remember under ordinary conditions. The sword, suspended by a hair over a man who presumed to exceed his authority, is an historical fact. It took place in Syracuse, a whim of Damocles the elder, who was a tyrant. Even the banquet had been recorded by one of our more famous writers. He turned to me. So you see, Lucina, that I was not unfair to state that the sword was real only in so far as any story is real which can impinge on the imagination. I have never heard of Damocles, I said flatly, and I don't suppose Agamemnon has either. Have you, Agamemnon? There was a long silence. Yes, I've just remembered. Though the name was unfamiliar, my father told me the story when I was a child, before he went to the last battle. I said the sword and the man were real, I said passionately. Doesn't make them less real because somebody bothered to write them down. Why shouldn't the man have been another part of Agamemnon? Why shouldn't he have remembered his own sword? Why are the trees green instead of blue? Why is blood red instead of yellow? These questions are not yet within the scope of our consideration. We are only able to access those factors which we may hope to discover the cause. I had promised myself that Asclepius would not be able to destroy my new confidence, and yet I could not think of any way to make the others believe me, or even to be sure that I believed myself. What about me, said Euripides. Did I behave according to your pattern? Entirely. I hoped that you would continue to see your emotions as separate entities of which you could maintain control even in extreme stress. You have proved that you possess the finest quality of the dramatist, who projects his ideas on a wider stage than that of his trivial identity. Your ode is excellent, the lines superbly balanced, no overstatement, no self-pity. Unless I make my judgment, it will equal the best work of your illustrious prototype. And Epicurus? He again was entirely credible. Instead of trying to play some unsuitable role, he continued to remain calm, to see that food was provided, the faithful steward. At least I had the intelligence to accept my mediocrity, said Epicurus bitterly. Did none of the others hear the disillusion in his voice? Were they all such fools that they paid no tribute to his deep humanity? Narcissus scrubbed the floor, so I'm told. He remains content to leave the directive to others. Someone has to scrub, I said. He was only doing what you told him, keeping the place clean so that there was less chance of the plague spreading. Exactly, and do not mistake me. Obedience is an estimable virtue if it does not become the ruler of initiative. I shall remember that and continue to allow myself the privilege of making my own decisions.